Today's conversation is one that every leader can benefit from, regardless of industry. Because whether you're running a nonprofit, a small business, a growing company, or leading a team inside a larger organization, you're facing many of the same challenges. How do you build sustainable growth? How do you develop people instead of creating dependency? How do you create systems that continue working even when you're not in the room? To help us explore those questions, I'm joined by Sara Orellana. Sara is a nonprofit strategist, leadership advisor, and organizational development consultant who works with nonprofit leaders to strengthen funding strategies, build sustainable systems, develop leadership capacity, and create organizations that can thrive long after the founder or executive director moves on. What I appreciate about Sara's work is that she doesn't just focus on fundraising. She focuses on helping organizations become healthier, stronger, and more resilient from the inside out. Today, we're going to talk about leadership, organizational culture, not-for-profit sustainability, neurodiversity, system thinking, and what really takes to build an organization that creates lasting impact. Sara, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Joe. It's a pleasure to be here.
So Sara, for those hearing your story for the first time, tell us a little bit about your journey.
Yeah. Okay. So I will say I'm going to borrow a line that I heard from another woman on a podcast. My journey and my path was anything but linear. I graduated college with a bachelor's of arts in English literature from Rutgers University and kind of tried to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. I knew that I loved teaching, but I didn't like the constraints that the Department of Education puts on teachers. And so being the rebellious sort that I am, I kind of figured it out until I fell into nonprofit work. And that's where I really found my passion because I realized I could work with kids, I could teach, and I could make a change, which was all really important things for me. And so I started my very first job working with middle school and high school students who were in the custody of the Office of Juvenile Affairs at the local children's shelter. So they had all committed minor infractions of the laws. They were still on trial. So let's say, it was minor infractions, hadn't been proven yet. And that's where I discovered my love of working with kids. I love the attitude, I love the challenges, and I love the systems change. But where I was working, there were no systems in place. You didn't have a clear hierarchy. People were telling you what to do as something different every single time, and you could never get a manager. And that was kind of frustrating. So I went to graduate school, worked at a couple different places, continued to see unhealthy organizations, and started to notice some real changes within myself as I emerged into different leadership roles, changes I didn't like, where I was becoming jaded and didn't, believe in the mission of nonprofits anymore. And it wasn't what I wanted. So I took a step back and I started my company where I decided I could do the things the way I wanted to do them, making sure things were done right and in a healthy way. And it's been an 8-year journey and it's been amazing. I worked with for-profits, nonprofits. I've taught for the SBA and SBDC in Oklahoma and throughout the country. I've led different women's courses. I've taught pretty much anything you'd like. And now I've kind of fallen into grant writing, teaching grant writing, leadership and mentorship. And it's been a pretty exciting road.
Interesting. So working closely with these not-for-profit leaders, executive directors, and boards, when you look at the organizations that consistently thrive versus those that constantly struggle, what are some of the biggest differences that you've noticed?
Okay, yeah. Let's start with the negatives, so to speak, because I think sometimes it's easier when you know what not to do. And so one of the biggest differences is the lack of communication between the board chair and the executive director, as well as the board of directors being operational and functional. So what a lot of people miss is the board of directors has a very, very unique role, but one that must be worked on every day. So while they're not responsible for the day-to-day operations, they're responsible for managing the executive director, fundraising, setting the goals and the strategic planning of the organization, and then asking how they can support on a daily basis. And what a lot of them miss too is they're also expected to give of their time, talent, and treasures, meaning volunteering with donations. And then a lot of times you have executive directors who are wearing too many hats. Maybe it's a founder and they're a little possessive about their organization. They don't understand the power of collaborations and partnerships. And so they create a silo and they think that if they share any information, they'll lose donors, they'll lose grant funding. They don't have clear outcomes. They don't track their data. And overall, everybody is overworked and driven by mission, yet there's mission creep. So those are things that really define that unhealthy nonprofit that isn't going to grow. Your healthy nonprofits have leaders who have more of a business mind, who are talking to their board chair. I'm not going to say daily, but 2 or 3 times a week. There's a good, steady, strong conversation flow. The board meets probably every other month because there's good committee work and committees are involved in supporting the work. You have a very definite leadership team, and the leadership team checks their egos at the door, and everybody comes in ready to work and solve problems. And when the problems arise with clients, the leadership team knows how to ask really great questions of that frontline staff to get those solutions out of the frontline staff. And where time off is respected, where boundaries are set, where it's just overall a healthy workplace, and where donors get to know what their dollars actually are invested in and outcomes. And so there's a really long, kind of convoluted answer, but that's the difference between an unhealthy and a healthy nonprofit. And I could go into even more detail if you'd like.
Well, yeah, anything that helps our listeners learn more about how to create success in that environment. I would say that one of the things that I often hear is that many nonprofits end up feeling trapped in survival mode. They focus on the next grant or the next fundraising or the next budget challenge. Why do so many organizations get stuck there?
So, in my professional opinion, I think it's because nonprofits don't operate like for profits. And what I mean by that is when you run a nonprofit, you have to have the same management. Oh, okay. So, realistically, let me back up a minute. The main difference between a for profit and a nonprofit is an IRS tax code. And if we keep it that basic, that's the main difference. For profits still have to be very business minded, meaning they've got to have financial goals. They've got to know what they're raising. They've got to know how they're doing it, but they've also got to be realistic about it. And they have to understand the need for diversification of funds. So if you don't have multiple lines of revenue coming into this nonprofit, you're going to feel stuck in survival mode. Now, grants are key, but you can't depend on them long term because, programs change, foundations change, boards change. There's always that human element. So you can't count on them. They're a nice cushion. And if you get them, great, you can readjust your budget. Donors are easier to maintain long-term as long as you're communicating with them and they understand what they're giving. Now, where people kind of get out of control is I think a lot of organizations do too many fundraisers or fundraisers that we're tired of. I don't know about you, Joe, but I do not want to go to another gala, sit in a Spanx in an uncomfortable chair eating bad catered food. I would just as soon give you my money than sit there like that, right? Where most nonprofits are missing is program revenue, but also earned revenue. And the earned revenue is where I'd like to spend the majority of my time. So Joe, let me ask you, have you ever met a nonprofit that if they really thought about what they do, that they didn't have a service that they could sell to a for-profit?
No, I mean, no.
Right?
I'm trying to think. Yeah, yeah. I mean, there may be like a smaller like youth program that is specific to, like a sports not-for-profit.
So let me challenge you there. So I used to do after school programming and summer programming for high risk students. Kids are where I'd love to spend my time. So this one's focused on youth, right? Or I'm sorry, sports. So you're saying, okay, what could the business model be? What could they sell back to for-profits? If you run a nonprofit based on sports, you are teaching character ed, you're teaching sportsmanship, you're teaching team building. Right? You can't have a sports camp without teaching those fundamental leadership qualities. Therefore, you could develop a curriculum and training that you could take into the corporate world that maybe to keep it a little different than everybody else. And depending on your target audience, you keep it a little bit sports-based, more activity-based, but you could go in and sell training and character ed based on work you've done with high-risk youth to your corporations and get more bang for your buck because you're actually living it and doing it than somebody who just develops a curriculum and goes and teaches it to professionals.
Interesting. You got me definitely thinking deep on that one and figuring out how to do those things. That makes it a good conversation here. When you've spent a lot of time helping these leaders build sustainable systems, when you talk about sustainability, what does that actually look like beyond simply having enough money in the bank?
Right. So I think a lot of misconceptions is people are like, oh, I'll be sustainable when I get an endowment. And you know what? If you have an endowment or you have the power to get endowment, God bless, do it. Because a lot of times that endowment will cover operational expenses or something that grant funding or donors won't. But you can't count on getting an endowment. And I don't think you should put all your energy there. I think you need to really look at how can you bring true revenue in that's going to cover your general admin and operating, but donors and grants aren't going to want to cover. How does that work? What does that look like? Does that look like serving a broader range of people, doing a sliding scale fee for services, selling your services? The problem is most executive directors get very stuck in a box and all you hear is, well, we're a nonprofit. We can't sell our services. We can't make a profit. We can't do mission creep. And all of that's not true. You can very much create a program to sell or a way to generate revenue without doing mission creep. And you can also, be very creative in the way that you do that and bring awareness. So, like, for example, one of the things that I always talk about with sustainability, especially with smaller nonprofits, who doesn't need an executive assistant? Everybody needs one. But if you can't afford one, and maybe you don't even need one full time, why couldn't two or three nonprofits share an executive assistant? Or let me take it one further. What if you had two or three nonprofits that offered similar complementary services that all were in one location together and shared one administration staff? By thinking differently, by creating these collaborations, these partnerships, or by combining and merging, you could serve a larger population and generate revenue. And that's true sustainability. Sustainability isn't the rich donor. It isn't the legacy. It isn't the endowment. Those are hopes, wish, and jelly beans. And if you read my Substack, you'll see that's a phrase I use all the time. Nonprofits focus and run so often off of either duct tape and paper clips or hopes, dreams, and jelly beans. What they've got to do is start looking for those creative ways to bring that revenue in. And that's merging, that's sharing employees, that's maybe two nonprofits in the same building, or selling your services to a for-profit.
Interesting. So you touched upon this a little bit earlier in a conversation, but a lot of organizations become dependent on just a handful of key people when we're talking about sustainability and moving forward. Sometimes the handful of people, sometimes it's the founder, the top fundraiser maybe, or one of the strong executives that does all the work. What risk does that create? And how can leaders begin building organizations that don't rely on one person to survive?
Right. So I'm so glad you asked that question. That's also one of my favorite things to talk about. I'm actually helping a very large organization right now work through a similar issue. And here's my recommendation. And Joe, this is my recommendation that then you could take and turn into a 21st century solution. So this is something we'd have to partner on because, I'm not as technology forward as you are. Okay. What you need to have is what I call basically an operational Bible. You need to create a book. And I always say have one hard copy, have it on the thumb drive, and have it in the cloud. Have it saved in as many places as possible and different formats as possible. And the reason that I say a hard format is because, God forbid, all your people were struck by lightning and they're gone. You want Joe Blow off the street to come in and be able to open that book and say, we're going to be able to keep services going. I'm going to start at page 1 and I'm going to work my way all the way through to the end. So the way that I recommend doing this, because that's really overwhelming, right? Think about it that way, is break it up into workable pieces. So like go to your finance person, so your business manager, and say, hey, I'm going to give you this notebook. And for a month, I want you to keep track of every bill you pay, every invoice. I want you to think about quarterly and annual. I want you to write down all the passwords, all the account numbers, anything that somebody would need to pick up if you didn't come back to work. And make it very clear that this is an exercise to create that infrastructure, to create sustainability, to create succession planning. This is not to move anybody out of a job. And if you do it with the right attitude, people are going to be very excited to do it. You can also use this to cross-train, which I am a huge proponent of cross-training, right? So identify all your departments, get every person to keep notes for a month. Come back together, swap your notes, have people ask questions, add a few more notes in, and then compile it all into one document that you save on property and off property. And that's the best way. And always think, I've got to write this in a way that somebody who knows nothing about us could come in and continue operating, programming, operations, everything. Then look for one trusted person in the community who knows very little about you. Don't talk to them about the project at all. This is key. Don't tell them anything that you're doing. Just ask them then when you're done if they would review it and tell you back what they understand. And the reason that you want that person to tell you back is to make sure it's readable and it's followable. And, don't use jargon. Don't get fancy. Write it at 8th grade level. Because if, Joe, you and I were working together and you were out sick and I had to do your technology stuff, I need to be able to read it at 8th grade level to manage my stress to be able to do what you do for the day, right? But you can also use that same document then when people are out on vacation or out sick so they don't come back to that massive, we both know, workload, 500 emails, all of that. You can use this document to cross-train so that we could partner together better. We can work together better. You can also use it as a talking piece with foundations to show the infrastructure that you're currently building, which will give them more faith in your organization because they know if they give you money, the world is going to keep moving forward, whether you're there or not.
Right. I wonder if the 15-minute methodology would work for that, where you have someone for 2 weeks, write down every 15 minutes. What did you accomplish in 15 minutes? Because what do we hear all the time in the world, right? Oh, I'm very busy. What are you busy doing? And that really kind of opens up that window. I owe it to myself to do that too. So I say it, but I need to do it as well.
I need to do it too, so don't worry. We're all guilty of it.
Another thing that stood out to me about your work is your emphasis on leadership development. What are
Mhm.
some common leadership blind spots that you see that hold organizations back from reaching their potential?
Such a great question. So, besides the obvious answer of like egos, right? I think a lot of leaders forget what it's like to be on the front lines. I think they forget how to be emotionally aware, empathetic, and sympathetic. And I think a lot of times too, they misunderstand their position. Leadership doesn't mean that you're there to solve the problems. It means you're there to create a safe environment and ask the right questions to help guide your staff to the right solution. So it's really about identifying your communication methods, understanding how you can communicate better with your staff. So often I see entire organizations focus on what can we do to make the executive director's life easier, or how can we make sure everybody stays informed. Great question. So, other than the obvious answers of not having an ego, the leaders need to understand that their role is in creating a safe culture that is healthy and maintaining that safety for their employees and creating the kind of situation where they're the guides on employees' journeys. So, it doesn't fall on leaders to make the decisions. It falls on leaders to ask the right questions and provide the right resources and tools to be that guide for their team to create the solutions. Because at the end of the day, your team is always going to have the better solutions because they're on the front lines versus leadership. It's also the leadership's job to get yelled at and to take the blame, but yet pass all the celebrations over to their staff. But what happens so often is in nonprofit world, and I'm guilty of this. So please know that all of my fingers are pointing back at myself here. Besides the fact that we get so busy, we forget to be emotionally aware and empathetic. We also start getting so busy, we forget to notice people. We forget to see what they're doing. We forget general politeness. And so I think with nonprofit leaders, it's about taking that breath, it's slowing down. It's about turning the culture around where your team isn't asking how they can make your life easier. It's asking how you can make your team's life easier. It's learning really great communication skills. It's bringing in the right trainings. It's admitting when you're wrong. It's really simple, basic things, but it's really that leadership really controls the overall culture of your organization. And Joe, I'm sure if you and I talked, we could come up with some really horrific stories between the two of us of different cultures and things we've worked in that have been traumatizing. And so really being open to having that open door policy and letting people come in and say, hey, it really upset me when you said this in the meeting, saying, I hear you. I apologize for upsetting you. Could we talk about why this upsets you and work through this so that we can get to the source of that solution? And taking that time and being people centered. And I think with executive directors, they think, I've got to be glamorous. I've got to be this. I've got to go out and speak to donors. And you have to do all of that. But you've also got to give your first and foremost to your team.
You've spoken a lot about neurodiversity and the
Mm-hmm.
value of different perspectives within our organization. I think one, it's good to point out really what neurodiversity is, and then two, how that has shaped your own leadership philosophy and what can leaders do to better leverage the strengths of diverse thinkers.
So I try to be very transparent about this. I have a pretty severe case of ADHD. And on top of that, I was diagnosed in my late 30s, which is very common for women. And with that, I have that, and I'm going to say this wrong, so you'll get a comment on it, but I have that sensitivity to rejection. So sometimes I can misinterpret things. I also really struggle to read social cues. So it's really forced me to learn how to better engage with people. And so with staff, I've had to be very honest and say, hey, I have ADHD. So if I'm walking down the hall to get a glass of water, please talk to me. But if you need something from me, I need you to either put a sticky note on my desk or I need you to email me. Because if those two things don't happen, I'm going to forget. And it's not
Mm.
because you're not important to me. So for me, it's been very clear in communicating that you're very important to me. And while I should do my best to communicate in everybody else's style, if you need something from me, please give it to me in writing and I will 110% meet that. It's also recognizing signs and symptoms of burnout because people with ADHD, because we mask and because we have to create internal systems to just manage day-to-day tasks, understanding we can't always take on as much as everybody else. And it's really, for me, been learning to control my emotions, which I know sounds probably odd. Like I am great in crisis. I'm great with lots of kids, but then you give me one little thing and I can completely fall apart about that. And that's really common with a lot of people with ADHD. So for me, it's been a lot of lifestyle changes and emotional regulation. So I would say if you're working with somebody and you notice the struggles with focus or just a variety of different things, have honest conversations with them and say, have you been diagnosed with this? I would love to make accommodations for you at work. if you haven't been diagnosed with this, I am not suggesting that you have it. I'm not being, like pushy or anything, but how can I accommodate you at work? How can I better suit you? And I think it's understanding those different perspectives and making them feel safe to ask for what they need in order to be successful. So, like for me, I have to take handwritten notes. I can't take digital notes. But I find it also very distracting if I'm in a meeting and everybody's on their cell phones. It's like, what are you doing? And so just like letting me know, hey, you're taking your meetings. And so creating an environment where your staff feels safe enough to ask for those accommodations, and you'll stand up for your staff and make sure that they get them.
That's great. I think it's very important to make more awareness of that in the work environment. To be able to recognize those things and not just think, oh, this person's just really high strung
Right.
or they're short tempered
Mhm.
or things of that nature. That's not what it is. And as long as we continue to communicate that, we can work to have a better working environment. So thank you for sharing that. I know that's more personal than anything else. Many leaders struggle to balance mission with operations. How do
Mm,
organizations stay
yes.
focused on their mission while still building the processes and accountability needed to grow?
So, okay, I'm going to get a little nitpicky here. So please push back on me and tell me if I'm being too much here. I think every organization should have a vision statement and a mission statement, and both of them should be phrases. Your vision statement is what problem are you solving? And then your mission statement is how are you going to solve that? And then personally, because and this is probably my ADHD coming out. I need to have that written down where I look at it every day. I need to have it on the wall. I even put it on letterhead, internal emails and communications, because when you understand what your mission is, what it is you're supposed to be doing, that can help guide your operations. You can use it as a boundary so that you don't have mission creep. So what I have seen happen so often, I'll give you a real example. I worked with a community in Oklahoma that built this amazing food bank, and people could come and get free hot meals there. Well, they noticed that people needed a place to stay. So they opened it up for a little bit longer, provided water. Then they noticed people wanted to learn how to garden. All of that really goes with teaching people how to eat and feeding people. But then they wanted to start doing resume building classes and job fairs. And I said to the director, I said, this is great. You're hearing a problem and you want to create a solution, but that's outside of your mission. What you need to do is, because you have the relationship already and your building is a safe place, is you look for somebody, another nonprofit who will come in and teach that resume building, who will come in and do those fairs and offer them a location and a partnership and a collaboration. That way your people still come, you're still technically providing the service, but you're not overstepping a boundary. And when I think you look at every decision that you have to make with that lens, even operationally, it's going to guide you on how to hire, how to staff, how to have meetings when you let your mission guide you on everything. Exactly.
Looking ahead, what challenges and opportunities do you see for nonprofit leaders over the next 5 years or so?
Great question. Okay. All right. This is the hot seat question. Let's really dig into this one. So, in my humble opinion, and this is just my opinion from talking to as many nonprofit leaders as I have right now, the number one thing that we need to not do in the next 3 to 5 years is succumb to fear, succumb to any of the messages that funding is being cut, or to allow that worry and fear to drive us to make decisions. Now, there's a huge difference between looking at the data and making educated decisions, like maybe we should trim back a little bit, maybe we should cut this back a little bit, versus I'm going to react in fear and worry. So the number one thing that's happening right now is I'm hearing a lot of desperation, a lot of fear, and a lot of worry. And nonprofit leaders are also wanting to put out a lot of desperation messages. I'm going to be honest with you, that doesn't work. It may work for the
Mhm.
ASPCA with the Sarah McLachlan song, but it's not going to work for anybody else. What you need to do is you need to get grounded. You need to get rooted, and you need to really understand what your mission is, assess it, assess your infrastructure, and then you need to start looking at your data and how that data tells a story, and start communicating, the ROI and the direct link to community development and economic development. And you need to start looking for those key partnerships and collaborations. And if you do this, I promise you, your funding will reappear. You will get new funding and new donors will be drawn to you. The biggest challenge that we're seeing is a lot of communities have a ridiculous number of nonprofits within that community. And a lot of the nonprofits are duplicating services or could be merged into one nonprofit that wouldn't have any mission creep. And so unless we start thinking collaboratively, And we start looking at this from a business mindset of how do we continue to provide these services in the most efficient and economic way possible, and start encouraging the conversations of partnering or combining or merging, we're not going to see our way out. But the number one thing we have to stop doing is fear. So the next 3 to 5 years needs to be based on hope and data and moving forward at a nice slow speed.
Okay. So given all this information, if you could sit down with every nonprofit executive director in the country and give them one piece of advice, what would it be?
Okay. I would say, look at your mission, look at your vision, write out your problem statement, back it up by data so that you can clearly say, this is what we do and this is what we've achieved and this is how many people we've how many people we've invested in. And this is how we are directly impacting the community and the economy. If you can say all of that much better than I just did with eloquence, you will be set up to navigate these troubling waters.
Okay. And before we wrap up, one more, I'm going to reverse it on your question. What's one lesson leadership has taught you that you wish you had learned earlier in your career?
Wow, that is such a great question. Leadership has taught me patience, humility, and how to ask really great questions and how to ask for help. And I wish I had known all those things earlier.
Well, you know them now, and obviously that's translated into a lot of great success for you. So, Sara, I mean, this has been such a valuable conversation. I think one of the themes that kept coming up throughout our discussion is that sustainable organizations aren't built by chance. They're built by intentionality. They're built through good leadership development. They're built through systems that we talked a lot about, but they're also built through great culture. And they're built by leaders who understand that their job isn't just to solve today's problems, but they're prepared to prepare others to solve tomorrow's problems. Whether someone is leading a not-for-profit, a business, community organization, or growing a team, I think there are lessons from this conversation that apply across every business. So Sara, I want to thank you for sharing your experience, your perspective, and your passion for helping organizations create lasting impact. And for everyone listening, we'll include information that shows notes so that you can connect with Sara and learn more about her. Sara, if they wanted to find you from listening to this podcast, where can they look?
Best place is LinkedIn. You can find me on LinkedIn. I will admit though, my picture needs to be updated. I have blonde hair in that picture, but you'll find me. Or you can email me at sarah@3raptorconsulting.com.
Great. Sara, thank you again for joining us. And thank you for everyone listening. Until next time, keep learning, keep leading, and keep building organizations that build a difference. And there we go.
Hey, I loved it. I got a little passionate, so I hope that was okay.
No, it's perfect. That's what we want. We don't, you got to have passion, or else people fall asleep listening, or they go to the next one. We're in this short-term society now where if you're not engaging them the whole time, then they're checking to the next place, right? So
exactly.
I like the idea of the operational Bible, and I'd be happy to work with you on that and have some other conversations outside of that too. I think immediately when you mentioned that, I thought of like 3 or 4 different directions to even take that, and I've written some books that I need to publish and upload that are not even, well, one's within my industry. One is more of a psychological look at being a father and versus being a kid's best friend, and why you can't be both. And so it's like those things that just building educational components is intriguing to me. So I'd love to maybe figure out some times that we can touch base again and talk about that.
Yeah, I would love that, because if we could find an easy way, especially AI driven, to create that, I think it would be valuable. And I don't think it would hurt either of our businesses. I think it would probably be financially good for us as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So here's maybe, and we were just getting this podcast done and everything, but maybe we start setting up a couple of weekly conversations, because one of the things I've learned through doing these podcasts and the pre-podcast and everything else is I like to have these kind of conversations recorded all the way through, because then you capture things that you may have missed through retention. You brought it up perfectly in the podcast today that, if you need something from me, please write it down, right? Because you don't retain it, right? So if we record these things, we can go down a ton of different bunny trails and then have the transcript pulled together, then put that in the AI and be like, all right, now pick out the parts where we talk about this, or, itemize them. One of the things that's great when I do these podcasts is I'll put it into an AI tool that'll edit some of the components of the full thing, but then they'll also create little reels of key bonus points from the questions that we have. Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, you tell me, what days work best for you, and we can start talking about that more and seeing what we can
Yeah,
build.
that would be absolutely great. I think something like this, Mondays are the perfect days for me.
Okay.
Tuesdays and Wednesdays, I try to meet with all my clients, and then Thursdays I'm on site. But Mondays and Fridays, I like to be creative.
Okay. Well, then let's just put it down for the 4 o'clock period, and we'll get from there. And so I'll send you another invite then for next Monday. Next Monday, good?
Yes, next Monday's perfect.
Okay. Well, then that's what we'll do. We'll do next Monday, and we'll start planning this thing out and kind of just figuring out what direction we want to go with it, because what we can do is after we talk about it, everything, we can task AI to, one, start writing it, two, build a workflow for it. And then, because I see flow charts too. My project management side of me thinks, it's great to have the explanations, but sometimes you want those quick little points, and then those flow chart points reference more detail, right?
Exactly.
So,
Exactly. Yes.
all right, great.
Okay.
Well, again, sir, this is great. I really appreciate you coming on and doing the podcast with me. And yeah, I'm kind of excited to see what else we can build together.
Me too. Me too. As long as you do the technology side, I'll bring ideas.
Listen, I'll put it to you this way. I enjoy being the guy doing the back end stuff and someone else being on the front end. That's a perfect marriage for me. I always try to explain to people, so I'm going to dork out for a minute. Austin Powers.
Yep.
You ever watch Austin Powers? Okay, Dr. Evil
I've
is
seen them
always the
all.
forefront, right?
Yes.
I like being number two.
I get that reference. Yeah. It depends on what I'm doing. Sometimes I like to be the front and sometimes I don't mind being behind. Just all
We'll figure it
depends.
out. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the technology stuff, I'll do the building part. That's what I enjoy. That's where I really get the most energy. The thing that I've really done by these podcasts have helped is being the front end driver of building these things. So I don't know where these podcasts are really going to go and how many podcasts are really out there, right? I'm using the podcasts to build special relationships and from those relationships figure out if there are things that can be done beyond that with those relationships. So, and I've partnered some people together that has no financial benefit to me. And it's, the most rewarding things that I've done in my life is created success for other people. So that's what I enjoy. If I can get paid to do it, then spot on.
Yes, that's the part I haven't figured out. But no, I love connecting people. So
Yeah, me neither. I know. All the time it's like, you're a salesperson. I go, yeah, but I hate asking for the money.
right.
Do
It
anything for
depends.
anybody. I'll do anything for anybody, but when it comes to asking them, like, yeah.
Yeah.
I felt guilty this weekend. I went and my son's best friend's parents, we've known each other for years and everything. He's an attorney, makes tons of money. He's got a rental property. I had some damage that I knew how to fix. And I went up there and did it. I made my son go with me because he needs money for college. And I hated even asking for the little bit of money that I could when I knew that if they had to hire someone to do it, it would have cost 2 to 3 times what I sent them to charge them. And I still feel guilty about it.
You get
That's a
that. No, I
personal thing.
totally get that. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if I'll ever get away from it, but either way. Well, Sarah, then I look forward to talking to you next Monday.
Sounds good. Thanks so much.
Yep. Have a good evening.
All right. You too. Bye.